Hello everyone. In this lesson, we are going to continue working on our search overlay JavaScript. Let's dive right into the action. So the first thing that I want to work on or address is when someone opens up the search overlay, you'll notice that just barely behind this transparent layer, you can see the main web page in the background. And notice that I'm still allowed to scroll up and down, and you can see the page in the background reflecting that. Now, I think that's potentially very awkward or confusing for visitors of the website. So what I want to do is, as soon as you open up the search overlay, I want to remove the ability to scroll the main page. Now, I've already written a CSS class that we can add to the main body element to achieve just that. So let's go ahead and use JavaScript to add and remove that class to the body element at the right times. So over in our text editor, in our theme folder, let's jump into our JavaScript and then modules folder. And let's open up search.js. And if we want to do something as soon as the overlay is opened, we can just write a bit of code within our open overlay method. So right after this line of code where we add a class to the overlay div, let's just use jQuery to target the main body element. Right? The element that all HTML content lives within. And then let's give it a class. So add class. And the class name is body-no-scroll. So I've already written a CSS class with this name that will tell the element to use overflow hidden, which will remove the ability to scroll. So let's save that. And then over in the browser, you'll notice as soon as I open up the search overlay, I'm scrolling my mouse wheel, but nothing happens. Perfect. However, once I close the search overlay, now I'm still unable to scroll, and that doesn't make much sense, right? So as soon as someone closes the overlay, let's just go ahead and remove that class that we just added to the body element. So within our close overlay method, let's add a new line, target the body element, and let's just remove a class instead of adding one with the same name, body-no-scroll. Okay, so now when you first load the page, you can scroll. Open up the search overlay, you can no longer scroll, but as soon as you close it, it's back to normal. Okay, now let's change gears. The next thing I want to work on is keyboard shortcuts to open and close the overlay. So I think it would be cool if you could press the S key on your keyboard, S for search, and that would open up the overlay. And then it would be nice if you could press the escape key on your keyboard to close the overlay. So let's jump back into our JavaScript and make that happen. Let's begin by focusing on our events area, right? Because we want to respond to the event of a key being pressed. Now, with our previous events, these on-click events, we were only interested in the click event if a very particular element was getting clicked on. But in this case of a key being pressed on a keyboard, it's not like we want a particular element to be aware of it. We want the entire page or browser in general to be on the lookout for key presses. So here's what we can do. On a new line within our events method, let's use jQuery to select the main document object. And this is the web browser's model of the entire current page. All right, and then that is what we can use the jQuery on method with. So just like we did up on these two lines, the on method takes two arguments. The first is the event that you want to be on the lookout for. So in this case, instead of click, let's go with key up. And that's when a user releases or lifts up off a key that they just pressed down. We will learn about key down a bit later on, but for now, let's go with key up. Okay, and then the second argument is the function or method that we want to call in response. So just like on these two lines, we began with this to look at the current object, and then we can look inside it for the name of one of our methods. Right, the methods are the actions that live down here. So down here, let's say this dot, and then we get to make up a name for a method that we are going to create in about 10 seconds from now. So the name doesn't matter. I'm just going to make something up. Why don't we call it key press dispatcher? And then while we're at it, why don't we use bind this so that within this method, the keyword of this refers back to our main object. So right after this dot keyPressDispatcher, let's say dot bind this. Okay, now we said that this is the name of the method that we want to call when this happens, so we better actually go and create a method with this name. So down here in our methods area, let's just create a brand new method named keyPressDispatcher, parentheses, curly brackets. And before we worry about doing anything truly useful, why don't we add a bit of a test here, just to make sure things are working. Why don't we say console.log, this is how we can output a test message into the browser, console.log, and within the parentheses, let's say, this is a test. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and then over in the browser, I want you to open up the JavaScript console. If you're using Google Chrome, you can always just click View up in the top menu, and then under the Developer menu, you can choose JavaScript Console. Another way to open the console, and this works in almost every browser, not just Google Chrome, you can right-click anywhere on the page and choose Inspect, and then within the pop-up Developer Tools window, just choose the Console tab. Okay, so here's my JavaScript console, and I'm going to resize my web browser window so we can see the console in the background. And if I click back anywhere onto the main browser window and press a key on my keyboard, oh, looks like it's not working. Aha, I see the problem. So when we say on the key up event, the U in the word up should be lowercase instead of uppercase. Sorry about that. So key up, all lowercase. Let's save that again. And now if I press a key on my keyboard, cool, we see our console.log. This is a test message. All right, so now that we are successfully responding to the event of a key being pressed, now we need to get more specific within our keyPressDispatcher method, right? Because we are not interested in just any key being pressed. We are only interested in the S key and the escape key, right? S for search should open the search overlay, and then the escape key should close the overlay. So the question becomes, how do we differentiate between different key presses in JavaScript? Well, the answer is something called a key code. So in JavaScript, every key on your keyboard has a unique numerical key code. So the question is, what is the numerical key code for the S key on our keyboard? Well, we could just go Google it, or I could tell you that it's the number 83, but I want to show you a practical way that you can find out any key code number for yourself. So in JavaScript, when we're looking out for the key up or key down event, when JavaScript calls this function in response, it's going to pass along a bit of information about the key press event into this function. So down here within the signature for that function, within the parentheses, we can make up a parameter name. So the name doesn't matter. We could say event, or we could even just say the letter E so it's easy to type. But now within the body of this method, we can look inside this parameter to find the information that got passed along about the specific key press event. So for example, we can look inside that parameter, and it has a property named key code. And this is the numerical code for whichever key on your keyboard was pressed. So just as a test, let's delete this, but inside our console log test message, instead of outputting a string of text, why don't we output e.keycode? So now if I save this and go back to the browser, if I press the S key, we can see 83. If I press the escape key, we see 27. And you could press any other key on your keyboard to find out the key code for whatever you're interested in, right? So if you want to find the key code for the letter B, just press B. You can see it's 66. If you're interested in the letter Z, press it. You can see it's 90. Okay, but back to our specific task. We are interested in the S and the escape key. So again, the letter S is 83. So back within our key dispatcher method, let's do this. Underneath this test line, let's use an if statement. So let's say only if parentheses, curly brackets. And let's say only if the key that was just pressed has a key code of 83, which is the S key, only then do we want to fire the open overlay method in response. So for the if condition, we can just say if e.keycode equals 83. Remember that when you're checking for equality, it's equal sign, two of them, instead of just a single equal sign that we use when we are asserting equality, right? Like when you assign a value to a variable. So if the key that was pressed is the S key, then inside of the body for this if statement, let's just call and run our open overlay method. So we can just say this dot open overlay in parentheses to actually call the function. Okay, let's go ahead and save that and give it a test. So I will press the S key on my keyboard. Perfect, it opened up the overlay. Now let's do the same thing for the escape key in closing the overlay. So right now if you press the escape key, you can see that it has a numerical code of 27. So back in our function, right below this if statement, let's just create another if statement and say if parentheses curly brackets. For the condition, we'll say if e.keycode equals 27, then fire the close method. So this dot close overlay. Let's give that a save. S key to open it, escape key to close it. Perfect. Except you might notice that if you press down the S key and hold it down without letting go of it, you'll notice that our overlay doesn't open until you actually let go of the key. Now that's not a big deal, but it can create a little bit of a laggy feeling because the event doesn't fire as soon as you press the key, but instead a few milliseconds later when you let go of the key. Now the reason we are seeing this behavior is because we chose to use the web browser's key up event. The key up event is the moment when a key is released or let go of, whereas the key down event happens the millisecond that you first press down on a key. However, there's another key difference between key up and key down. Key up will only fire once, but key down will fire again and again and again as long as you hold down the key. Now every browser is different. Some might fire the event every 5 milliseconds or every 500 milliseconds, but let me show you what I'm talking about. So if we set this to key down, save it and give it another try, if I hold down on the S key without letting go of it, you'll notice that the overlay opens immediately, but as I'm holding down the S key, notice that that event just keeps firing again and again and again. You can see the count going up. And if I press down the escape key and keep holding it down, you can see the same thing. Right? So it looks like key down is firing multiple times per second if you just keep holding down on the key. Now in this particular example, nothing bad is happening by running that event again and again and again. It's not a very costly event to run, so it's not like it's going to freeze someone's web browser. However, I don't want us to get in the bad habit of writing code that could potentially lock up the browser. Right? There's no need to run the same method again and again and again like this. So why don't we write a bit of code so that you can only close the overlay if it's currently open, and you can only open the overlay if it's currently closed. So that way, even if someone holds down a key and fires the key down event again and again and again, we won't actually be calling our open and close methods needlessly. The appropriate method will be called once as needed, and this way we never risk overloading or freezing a web browser. Now, in order to test this out, why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead and delete this console log message where we output the key code of what's being pressed. We no longer need that now that we know the codes for the S and escape key. So let's delete that line. And then just as a test, within our open and close methods, why don't we output a message so that we can see each time the method is being ran? So within our open overlay method, let's console.log and say our open method just ran. And then we can do the same thing in our close overlay. So at the end of this method, just run console.log and let's say our close method just ran. So now if we save that and I hold down the S key, without letting go of it, we can see that that method just keeps getting fired again and again and again. So now we can clearly see what we are trying to avoid. So all we need to do now is up within our keyPress dispatcher method, when we say only if the key code that's being pressed is 83, only then should you fire this method, we just want to add on another condition within these parentheses to say only if the key is 83 and if the overlay is not already open. So we could technically use jQuery here to check to see if the main overlay div has a class of search overlay active, but reading from the DOM is very, very slow in comparison to just reading from a JavaScript variable or property. So in order to keep your code as fast as possible, you should always avoid dealing with the DOM if at all possible. So instead of using jQuery here to check if a div has a certain class, why don't we go up into our constructor function and let's create a new property that stores a little bit of information about the state of the overlay. So this dot, let's create a new property and let's name it is overlay open. I just made up this name. You could choose whatever you want, but let's set its default or starting value to false, right? Because when you first come to the page, the overlay is not open. And now we can just change the value of this property anytime our open or close methods run. So down within our open overlay method, at the end of this method, let's just adjust that property. So this dot is overlay open, let's set it to true, right? Because after this method runs, the overlay will be open. Set it to true, and then in our close function or close method, let's set it to false. This dot is overlay open equals false. Cool, so now within our keyPress dispatcher, within our if statements, instead of looking at the DOM to see if that div has a class, we can just check our property, which is lightning fast. So we only want to open the overlay if it's currently closed. So we can just say if the key code that was pressed is 83 and just 2 ampersand symbols, and if this dot is overlay open, if that is false. So you could say equals false, but another way of doing it is you can just place an exclamation point or exclamation mark right before it. So altogether, only if the key that was just pressed is 83 and if the overlay is not currently open, then run open overlay. Let's do the same thing for the escape key. So only if the escape key was pressed and if the overlay is currently open, do we want to be able to close it. So we can just say this dot is overlay open, right? And if that property is set to true, this will evaluate to true. So now if we save this and go back to the browser, if I press the S key and keep holding it down, you'll notice that that method does not get ran again and again. It just runs once. Cool, and if I press and hold the escape key, it also only runs once. And that's actually going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we will learn how to manage time in JavaScript. So for example, when someone starts searching for biology, we don't want to send a search request when all they've typed in is the letter B. So we don't want to send a search request as soon as someone starts or stops typing. Instead, why don't we wait until they've paused or stopped typing for maybe 800 milliseconds or a full second. So for example, when they type in B, that would start a timer, but then if they type in another letter, it would reset the timer, and it would just continue on like that until they indeed finish typing and pause. This way, we avoid flooding the WordPress server with requests that don't even make sense, right? We don't actually want to search the WordPress database for B or BIO. You get the idea. So we will learn how to manage time, how to work with timers, and then in the lesson after that, we will learn how to talk to the WordPress database and retrieve real content in real time, on the fly. This is going to be a ton of fun. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.